Ladies and gentlemen, this is Corporate Responsibility Part 2. I actually had the idea to do Part 2 based on some questions that were asked by a very dear friend of mine who was actually the person that interviewed me for the best job I had after I retired from the Army that I never should have left, just so you know. But we're going to talk about taxes. I'm also going to discuss a little bit the $15 an hour minimum wage.
Like, subscribe, share with your friends, and comment, or you'll be visited by a reptilian hybrid from the Rockefeller Foundation.
Mein Gott!
I'm going to add an Army stereotypical statement as a former first sergeant. Yes, like, subscribe, share with your friends. When you subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can see the new videos as they come up. Corporate responsibility. The question was asked about should corporations pay their fair share in taxes? And that's a multi-level question. Or should I say it's a simple question with a complicated answer. Because should they? Yes. The issue with just making a broad statement of yes is what taxes are you talking about? So you have federal taxes, you have state taxes. Depending on where you're located at, you could have county and city taxes. New York City is a great example of that. And part of the reason that there is the flight there is from New York and California is high taxes. On top of high taxes, you have Elon Musk with Tesla saying he's going to move all his operations to Texas because the COVID lockdowns restricted his production lines. And with that, he can't meet the goals that are set to produce enough cars to make the company viable. Now, Tesla is a good and bad example because they're moving based on this, but they're also one of the most valuable car companies in the world, considering I would have to go back and look it up again, but I think they produce somewhere between 6 and 13% of the cars produced in America, and yet they're one of the most valuable car companies. So that part is it's based on personality. He does create a cult of personality around himself. But other companies or other corporations, if you tax them federally at a certain rate, and in certain states like California or New York, and I'll keep using those because they have extremely high taxes. What are these corporations going to do? They're going to move. They're going to move the company to states with better tax rates, as they should, honestly, because part of what their responsibility is to maintain profitability for their shareholders and their stakeholders, which would be their boards and their employees. Now, yes, they should pay their fair share, but that fair share becomes complicated because the way our tax system is set up, the federal government really doesn't take into account the state tax rates. Now, I know in the last tax legislation that was passed during the Trump presidency, people could no longer claim local taxes against their federal taxes, which honestly I agree with. Because if you choose to live in New York City or you choose to live in Los Angeles, I should not lose a tax write-off because you choose to live in a high tax area. That's a choice you make. I live in Missouri. And the example is in Missouri, my military retirement is not taxed. The other two states I looked at moving to, which is Texas and Louisiana, my military retirement will also not be taxed. And this all goes into the math of where I'm going to decide to live. Well, for a corporation or for these billionaires, because everybody talks about tax, we need to tax the corporations, we need to tax the billionaires. That's where the problem is. Well, no, honestly, that's not where the problem is. The problem is spending. Because they've already shown, and the funny part about it is, there's politicians that have degrees in economics that know the answer, but they lied to you about it. We can tax the billionaires and millionaires and corporations to death and still never make a dent in the deficit we have now. Because taxing them to death is just going to lead them to move to a state where there's lower taxes, or to leave the country completely. and go to a country where there's a lower tax rate. There's a whole channel on YouTube about it called Nomad Capitalism. It's actually a pretty interesting channel if you want to check it out. And it talks about what countries have better tax rates, what countries you can basically buy citizenship in, or even without buying citizenship, the easiest place for Americans to get citizenship. Now, it's something I would never do. I would never go somewhere I would never renounce my citizenship. I love my country. I love the democracy in which I was born and raised. I spent 23 years in uniform defending it, and to this day I'll defend it, which goes back to socialism comes here to die, and the goal of socialism is communism. And the other quote I love is, not all socialists are communists, but all communists are socialists. So when we talk about corporate tax rates, we need to be very careful, because the federal tax rate is this. Then you have the state tax. Then you may have a county or parish, or you may have a city tax. So how does this all come together? It creates a very complicated system where if we're going to look at all these factors, then what do? And oh, by the way, here's the problem with the whole thing. We can talk about it all we want, but these corporations and these billionaires and these millionaires, elections are expensive. Where do you think politicians get the money to run for office? They get it from the corporations. They get it from the billionaires and the millionaires. Those are the people that decide who is going to have the money to run a campaign. Now, is there a place for somebody to run a localized campaign without a lot of funding? Yes, but it's always at the local level. It's in your city, county government. Maybe even state representatives can do it out of pocket with very few donors, so they're not owned by somebody else. But when you start talking about the federal level, I mean, just research how much money has been spent on the last 3 presidential elections. It is insane. So to answer your question, Shams, yes, we need to get money out of politics. If we want to fix any of this, that's the first step, is getting money out of politics. Because these corporations and these millionaires and these billionaires, the taxes aren't going to change on them, because the politicians they donated to are the ones that create this legislation. Now, if we can get the money out of politics, then we'll have a fighting chance of having them pay their fair share without hurting them in the process. And what I mean by hurting them, I'm not talking about their overall profits for the year. I am talking about them having to lay off employees, them having to close down things. We've lost enough jobs due to COVID that we cannot afford for anything else to close down. So the first step is getting money out of politics, and one of the steps for that is term limits. I talked about that in my last video. There's a bill right now in the Senate to create term limits, and that's a good thing. And even if they don't create it, then let's create our own term limits for what we will accept as constituents, as voters, as the American people. The $15 an hour minimum wage. Yes, everyone that works should earn a living wage. The problem with jumping to a $15 an hour minimum wage, and this is according to the Wall Street Journal, and I have my notes right here, so I'm going to read them straight off my notes. Moving to an immediate $15 an hour minimum wage will cost the country 1.4 million jobs. Although, with the loss of 1.4 million jobs, we will raise 900,000 people out of poverty. So, I can do basic math pretty well. So 1.4 minus 900,000 is 500,000. So that's 500,000 people that will gain unemployment benefits because of what happens when we raise the minimum wage immediately. And this will not hurt major corporations. As I said in another video, Walmart, I guarantee you, already has a plan in place if this happens. And they have so many product lines in their stores, they raise the price on this one a couple of cents, they raise the price on this one 10 cents. In the end, everything costs more, but it's so slight you don't notice it. But for small business owners, and I'll give you the example of, in Jefferson City, Missouri, there's a place called Mel's Diner. It's great food, breakfast all day long, which I'm a huge fan of breakfast. So they have a lot of employees. Every time you go in there, it's always packed. And even with being packed, there's never really a long wait from the time you get in there to order to get your food. Now, a place like this, when it goes to $15 an hour minimum wage, they're either going to have to raise their prices to an extreme or lay people off. If they lay people off, the service gets slower. If they have an extreme increase in prices, they lose part of their customer base. So for a small business owner, this immediate raise in minimum wage is a no-win situation. Now, there are a few ways to address this. One would be gradually raising it, which makes sense. The other is we exempt
businesses that have a certain